Good morning. This is Frank Lasee. I'm the author of Climate and Energy Lies: Expensive, Dangerous, and Destructive. The reason for writing the book is people really need to be informed about the most important issues we have, because virtually everything we do, we eat, we consume, has a CO2 component, and it is built on lies. We are not overheating, and I'll go through all of those things pretty quickly. And they're covered in depth in my book that also has sources of all varieties and pictures and graphs to help it more easily understood for most people. But we're being lied both about climate, and it's being used to drive really bad energy policy that's completely built on lies as well. It's more expensive, not less expensive. So we'll get into it now and go through a bit of a presentation, and we'll see if Tom has any questions at the end. Climate's always changing, it always will. And that's what kind of an underlying false lie that we have that's never really spoken is that, if we just had less CO2, climate would be better, climate would stop changing, we wouldn't have any more hurricanes, we wouldn't have bad weather. This is simply false. We've always had bad weather and good weather, and we'll continue to do so no matter what we do. Climate and Energy Lies exposes the lies of both, and they're expensive, dangerous, and destructive, folks. The data just doesn't support a climate emergency, but yet they keep telling us that we have to have a climate emergency. There's a reason for it. It's about controlling all of us. We'll get into some of the facts. On the left is what they show us. Oh my goodness, we have an overheating world. On the right is actually what real temperature is for real people. It's stayed really pretty stable. It's about 1.5 degrees warmer than the Little Ice Age, also known as pre-industrial times. So that's some of that kind of marketing. Pre-industrial times doesn't sound nearly as cold as the Little Ice Age. And a few degrees warmer than the Little Ice Age. I think if you told people, most people go, yeah, that's a good idea. I think I would like it warmer than the Little Ice Age. There's no relationship long-term with CO2 and temperatures. And this graph is using proxies of all different sorts. We know it was a lot hotter and the Earth's been cooling. We also know CO2 is much, much higher and much lower in the past. It's gone up and down over the years. And there's no real true relationship between CO2 long-term and temperature. Also, this graph is the one that got me and Greg Wrightstone, who's the executive director of the CO2 Coalition and the CO2 Coalition, kicked off of LinkedIn. They just completely censored us, made us disappear. They disappeared me, kind of like what happened prior to World War II with propagandists, is they can't have, they have to censor other people who give information that doesn't fit their narrative. And there's factual polls out there and looking at it that when people are exposed to the type of information that I'm exposing you to right now, they go, hey, wait a minute. This climate change stuff really isn't all it's cracked up to be. They become much more realist, and not deniers, realists about what's really going on. The climate narrative is kept going by data tampering, censorship, bullying, deception, and spin, and a lot of money, multi-trillions of dollars. There's a whole green industrial complex called green, maybe because of the color of money, because it certainly isn't green for the environment, that's driving all of this. This is on the right-hand side. U.S. scientists in July 9th, 1971, were talking about the coming ice age. And during the 70s, there was a coming ice age. Why was that? Because the Earth was cooling from about 1940 to 1979. That's the picture on the lower right-hand side, and that is out of a Newsweek article and a Mother Earth interview with one of the leading climatologists from the University of Madison. And they knew that it was colder and getting cooler from about 1940 to 1979. And that's what the graph shows in the black. And then in the red is how NASA and NOAA have adjusted temperatures, and they've largely erased this cooling that was giving us the Little Ice Age. And many people have been around long enough to know and remember the Leonard Nimoy special about the coming ice age. And but then they switched. In the 80s, they switched from the ice age to global warming. And this points out an article from December 7th, 1989, and I'll read you the pink part. Analysis of the warming since 1881 shows that the increase in global temperature happened before 1919, before the more recent sharp rise in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, said Thomas Carroll, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Climatic Data Center in Asheville, North Carolina. While the global climate warmed overall since 1881, It actually cooled from 1921 to 1979, Carl said. And the reason I'm showing you this now on the graph on the right-hand side is the global average temperatures that they give us. This is one of the different ways of looking at it from climate.gov. And it shows a steady increase in temperatures from the cool 1900s all the way up to the present 2020. And they aren't showing the cooling trends that I just showed you a couple of them. And they aren't really showing that most of the heat happened from 1880 up until 1881. And that's part of this ongoing hoax and massage of the data that we have. Long term, we know, and everyone agrees on this, that we've had periods of interglacial times when it's warmer, and Wisconsin, where I live, isn't covered by 1.5 miles of ice. And then glacial periods where it is covered by ice for 100 to 120,000 years. And this interglacial period is not as warm as the prior interglacials. The Earth is cooling. We should fear the cold more than fearing the warmth, but they've done such a great job of propagandizing us. Why do we all wear clothes? Because not for only for modesty, but generally we need them because we're warm water creatures. We don't have hair. Warm air creatures. We don't have hair to keep us warm and fur. Without it, we have to adapt to our colder environment. Fear the cold, not the warm. This is also generally accepted. We've heard over and over again, it's never been warmer than now. Well, in fact, it has during this interglacial period that's lasted about 12,000 years. It's been much warmer during the medieval warm period. During the Roman warm climate optimum, they call it, it was much warmer than today. And then it was much cooler during the Little Ice Age that we just have come out of since about 1850. Changing climate, indicating in the Arctic. In Greenland, they have found people buried with roots growing through them. It's too cold in the permafrost now to grow, for trees to grow in Greenland, but they were growing during the medieval warm period from about 950 to 1350. The climate realists, or the climate fact deniers, want to say, oh, that was just local. It was just in Greenland. There are literally hundreds of studies of proxies around the world that it was warmer in most of the world all over during this medieval warm period. The Vikings were growing barley and had milk cows in Greenland during this period of time, and neither of those can survive there now. It's just too cold. It was warmer. This is a tree stump coming out of glaciers. It's 5,000 years old. It's been buried for 5,000 years under the ice, and now it's warming up enough for it to be exposed. During the Roman climate optimum 2,000 years ago, they built some forts in the Alps for controlling trade, and those forts have been under the ice for 2,000 years. So it was warmer back then. They were covered by ice. They remained covered by ice for 2,000 years. Now those glaciers are melting. So it was much warmer in the past than it is now, and that's better for humans. Cold is not so good. Crops fail. Growing seasons are shorter. There's not as much food available. You need more fuel to stay warm. All kinds of bad things happen when it's cooler. There is a relationship over the last 150,000 years of CO2 and temperature out of the ice cores. So they drill holes in the ice in Greenland and in Antarctica, and then they measure all the gases and the trace gases. And they can also get a reasonable idea of temperature through various proxies that they measure out. And what's interesting is the CO2 lags in the Antarctica ice samples. It lags temperature by 600 to 800 years. So something that lags temperature can't lead temperature, as we are being told. So the very foundation of what we're being told about CO2 being the control knob of the climate is simply made up and false. And then they built a narrative around it and propaganda around it. It's time for this to end because it's driving really bad energy policy, and we'll get into that. Not only do they have to lie to us about it, they also have to adjust the temperatures. So they take raw temperatures from around the United States and around the world. They're doing it both in the United States and everywhere else, and then they adjust them. And interestingly, pre-2008, they've adjusted the temperatures down. In post-2008, they've adjusted the temperatures up. So you're seeing here that they adjusted the temperatures and made it cooler in the past and are making it warmer in the present, giving us this 1.5 degrees of temperature increase that they're all telling us is somehow dangerous when in fact it isn't. Again, we're kind of going back. You saw this graph on the lower left-hand side that shows it was cooler in the past, and now it's much hotter as well. But I just wanted to show you something as well. There's death to millions in the caption in this article, death of millions in the 1921 record heat wave. So we had a very long heat wave throughout the whole world. And then if you look over on the bottom here in the 1920 category, it shows it was very cool during that period of time. But yet we experienced heat waves throughout the world that killed millions. That isn't reflected in the actual charts. And the fact is prior to about 1960, 1950, we have very little really good, accurate data for the whole world temperature at all. And you could even argue that even now we have very few and not enough temperature gauges around the world to give us a very accurate picture of the actual temperature. Also, pointing out again how they've cooked the books, changed the books, and something that we're told constantly is we're having hotter times now, more heat waves now. It's getting worse. We have to be worried. Well, the 1930s were far, far worse. In the 1930s, you can see these spikes, and these are coming from our world data. They have similar types of graphs on the EPA websites, NOAA's websites, if you can find them. They're trying to put those away and hide them because we had really a lot of heat waves during this period. But again, the temperature record doesn't show that the 1930s were hot. And the temperature record that NOAA has is largely erased the 1940 to 1979 cooling period. This is 1936, July 7th, 1936. All of the purple dots throughout the Midwest and around the whole country are temperatures above 100 degrees on July 7th, 1936. And all the red dots are temperatures above 90 degrees all over. This is how hot it was in 1936. And this was just one day. They had many days with this type of heat, but yet it isn't reflected in the long-term graphs of the temperature. And in fact, they've downplayed how much the 1930s, how warm it was, to pretend that it's warmer today than it was back then. This is where records have been set. The red dots are records, temperature records, the hottest temperature ever recorded in different areas prior to 1960. And the green dots are after 1960. If the world was overheating like they're telling us, we should see a lot more green dots and not so many red dots because it should be getting hotter and hotter. It simply isn't. And we chose 1960 for this graph because that's about the time that CO2 really started ramping up, and they claim that CO2 was driving all this heat that we're simply not having. Here they use climate predictions and models. They use models. They love to talk about models. Virtually all the models except for one, the Russian model, run very hot compared to observed data. So they overestimate the amount of heat through their models, and often you'll even see stories that models claim it's the hottest that it's ever been, not actual temperatures. So they conflate these things and really are propagandizing us. And in fact, they are paid to propagandize us by both nonprofits who are getting literally hundreds of millions of dollars of green largesse money, and maybe even money from China. Benefits China the most. These policies benefit China the most. And they are providing money some places. And the news media, the regular mainstream news media, has probably accepted tens of millions of dollars to propagandize us, not to tell us the truth about climate, but to propagandize us about man-made climate change. The Weather Channel, John Coleman, he said global warming is a fictional manufactured crisis and a total scam. He was very outspoken about it. They forced him out of the Weather Channel. He's one of these. Chris Martz is a great person to follow on X and other places. He does some really good work. He's still a student in college studying the climate, but he says that, he started out as a climate alarmist because he was propagandized as a kid. Then he did his own studying, and the more he learned, the less he became concerned. He's reevaluated all of it, and he has really great information. I'd recommend following him if you're interested in this topic. Michael Crichton, who authored a really great book on climate change and the green grift, so to speak. A nonprofit wants to create horrendous climate things so that would kill millions of people in order for them to continue the gravy train of making a living off the climate scam, because they had to save us from the climate and for the environment. But what he points out is number one, there are no peer-reviewed papers at all, not a single one, that proves that CO2 is the control knob of the climate or is actually driving temperatures. The peer-reviewed papers that they do have just start with that hypothesis that CO2 is driving it, and then they go on from there. They do not prove it, and we'll cover that a little bit more. But consensus is no way to do science. When they asked Albert Einstein, his response to the book, 100 Authors Against Einstein, written by the Nazis who didn't like the fact that a Jew was getting a lot of play and did something really great, helping us to understand the theory of relativity. And look, they call it a theory, but yet we don't call climate change a theory. It's really a theory of climate change. They still call it a theory of relativity that explains a whole lot of things in physics. But he said, hey, if I was wrong, it wouldn't take 100. It would only take one with the right information. And really, that is science. So this whole consensus thing, and I could spend some time utterly rebuking the 97% agree. They don't. Yeah, the world's warmed. We know that. CO2 isn't driving it, and warming is actually beneficial. What is it really about? Climate change is about money, power, and greed. To control energy, one must control the masses. This is someone, Ottmar Endenhofer, co-chair of the working group of the IPCC, supposedly the gold standard of information for man-made climate change, but they are really a disinformation organization. But their climate policy isn't environmental policy. There's almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore. This is really about controlling the masses and about power to the UN, the World Economic Forum, and other international globalist organizations. Nobel Prize John Clauser, 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics, he's come out and said there's no climate crisis. In fact, he says it's pure garbage, as it's circled in the middle of this article. And he said the IPC is one of the worst sources of dangerous misinformation. And that is what they do. And I'm not going to cover a lot of them, but unfortunately, they do have good information, but much of it is covered up and spun different directions. I want to show you something of how they cook the data book, so to speak. On the left-hand side is where we have temperature measurements in August of 2023. And the circled part in the middle is the Congo. The Congo area totally is almost 1 million square miles, and the country of the Congo is about 140,000 square miles. So we're talking about a really big area. You notice how it's gray. There's no temperature records from this really big area. Now look at the right-hand graph that tells us that August 2023 was one of the hottest ever. And you look at that same area and they're showing it's very, very, very hot. Well, they just made that temperature up. They made the temperature up. And then they applied it to literally nearly 1 million square miles and threw that in the mix and said we have one of the hottest summers ever. That's how they do this sort of stuff, folks. Then they alter the data. I showed you earlier they altered the US data. They also altered the data in Tokyo, in New Zealand, in Australia. I've done this, and I have in the book, we cover other places, South America, for instance, where they've done it everywhere. The lower numbers are the upper numbers are the actual temperatures as observed. You can see it shows very little warming. You see this here on Australia where it's green up here and goes across. And instead they adjusted down, just as they did in the United States, the temperature lower in the past, hotter in the present, to give us a gently rising temperature. They're doing this everywhere. They're cooking the temperature books. And it gets worse. They have fake data stations and they make up the data. So it's just amazing what's going on here. So what they're doing is they're removing data stations and they're moving them elsewhere. And they've removed about 1/3 of the United States temperature data stations. Why not just pay $500 and put a new one in place? Why not put it in a place that's more pristine? I'll show you. So here's one that they've closed. And it's hard to see in this kind of lighter area, but they've adjusted the temperature here just a little bit as well, cooling the past. But they close this one, and now they fabricate the temperature for this data station. Here's another one. There are two different data stations here that show you. One on the left is very pristine. You can see where it is. It's out in the middle of nowhere, so it hasn't changed a lot. And you can see it actually shows cooling over this period of time. No alarming warming whatsoever. The one on the right here is right here in the middle of buildings. And as buildings got added, asphalt got added, towers got added, cell towers create heat around them. You can notice how the temperature went up. This gets baked into their temperature data. So we have our urban heat island effect, where it gets warmer or where there's more buildings. And this is causing temperature increases in urban areas, and they're adding this into the temperature record. NOAA makes up the temperature of about 1/3, 388 different stations. I showed you how they're closing them, what they look like, and then they make up the data. If I made up the data for 1/3 of a data set, I could give you any number you really wanted. And they are, and they're very upfront about it. When you go into their records and they're available, they have an E for estimate next to those data sets they're making up. They're making up a whole bunch now. The urban heat island effect, it's very well known, not disputed, and measurable in the real world, that as areas urbanize and cities, they get hotter by as much as 9 degrees hotter. So any large city that has a temperature measuring station in it, like Houston or Phoenix or Chicago or Los Angeles, as they've grown bigger, they have gotten hotter. And rather than adjust that away and say, you know what, this Los Angeles or Phoenix has gotten a lot hotter because of all the buildings, we should lower the temperatures now, they're doing exactly the opposite. In effect, they have cooled the past and they've warmed the present. They should do the opposite. They should either increase the past temperatures or lower ours today because of the urban heat island effect that are affecting hundreds of different temperature stations around the United States. Here, we're going to get into all the disasters. We'll go over pretty fast on this, but they claim this is back in the 1970s already. This is from 1989, that we're going to have all kinds of bad things. Seas are going to rise. People are going to be displaced. People are going to starve. All kinds of bad things. They told us that climate change is going to cause more floods, droughts, fires, hurricanes, wind, even more poison ivy. Polar bears are in trouble. They're not. Sea level rise is going to be terrible. More people are going to die. They're even attributing hot and cold to climate change now. More snow and not enough snow, and too much rain and not enough rain. Tornadoes, ocean acidity, famine, all these things. This would be a long presentation. I went into all these, but we're going to go through some of them really quickly. The fact is that climate deaths are way, way down. We're better at identifying them, building buildings, and getting away from them than we ever have. And that's thanks to fossil fuels. The fuels that we have and the buildings that we have that are based on those protect us from the climate. Here's a great propaganda picture standing in the water. This is the socialist head of the UN who's trying to grab more power using the climate issue, Antonio Guterres. He's telling us all kinds of propaganda, and the media is dutifully telling us that this is the case. In fact, 75% of the ocean islands that he say are sinking are actually growing bigger through accretion. They're adding more sand and a coral around them, so they're actually getting bigger. And only about 12% are actually shrinking. The Great Barrier Reef is at a maximum now. They keep telling us about that as well. And there's no real acceleration in sea level rise. It's been rising a little less than an inch a decade since 1880, and that hasn't changed. We have good tidal records all over the world since 1880. Here's another one. Back from 1995, they were telling us that the East Coast would be underwater by 25 years. That's already come and gone. That hasn't happened. Here's another article, 15 cities that could be underwater by 2030. This was from 2023, this just last year. Nothing is like this is happening at all. Here's some pictures that you can see. The left is Bondi Beach starting in 1889. Another picture in 1909, another picture in 1989, and currently in 2019 with some of those people who want all of humanity to die. Also on the right-hand side, we see the Statue of Liberty 100 years and 100 years later with the high tides as well with the Boston Lighthouse. The ocean isn't rising exponentially. They're lying to us about that. Where's the climate emergency? Deaths from increasing extreme weather have not been happening there. We're actually having lower loss of life in the middle. And when you use global, while there's more to lose, in my book, there's pictures of Miami 70 years ago and almost no one lived there. Now billions of dollars of property are there. When you have a hurricane in Florida, there's literally millions more people who can lose things. When you look at it as a share Damages is a share for major events of GDP, the amount of gross domestic product or the total value of everything out there. You can see that there's no acceleration in costs. Yeah, there's more billion-dollar disasters because there's a lot more to lose because we have prosperity, and their energy policies driven by climate change are going to rob us of that prosperity. Floods. You can see there's no trends in floods from 1900 to 2020. In fact, the IPCC says that there's no floods or trends. And actually, they said for floods and droughts, 88% of the world have no trends whatsoever, positive or negative, and the other 12% is mixed, different in each different area. This is the western part of the United States. I'm just putting it on here to see the red parts are when it was really dry and there was a lot of drought. And you can see that they experienced hundreds of years of drought and that we're actually in a pretty wet time in the western United States. And people, have to have an historical perspective on these things just because we're being lied to. Violent tornadoes, you can see that there's no trend upward, and that red line on the top is the CO2 increases, but there's no more violent tornadoes than there are now. There is a bias in reporting that you'll see if you go to some websites that the government runs, because after we got Doppler radar around 1980, we had more smaller tornadoes reported because, yeah, if you think about it, before cell phones and people had to call in and say, hey, I saw this small tornado, it just didn't happen. So there is a bias for smaller ones, but large ones always got reported because people would see them. The same thing with global hurricane frequency. You can see there's actually a slight downward trend. We get regular propaganda on this. The 1940s were the most active decade in this century for hurricanes, and we had 24 of them that landfell in the United States and 5 major Category 5 hurricanes. We actually just had a decade with no hurricane landfalls at all. A whole decade. That's unheard of. So the facts are actually the opposite of what we're being told. Now, this is North American, Northern Hemisphere snow and ice levels. So you can see that, there's more in the summer and less, there's more in the winter and less in the summer, but there's no precipitous decline in snow, as they told us, the experts said would happen. This is worldwide ice, the Arctic sea ice. You can see it is declining a small amount, but nothing dangerous. Antarctica has not warmed in 70 years. There is one area, and if you Google it, you'd think that all of Antarctica is melting, but it certainly isn't. It's a huge continent, almost the size of North America. And there's one peninsula sticking out of it, the Thwaites Peninsula, nicknamed the Doomsday Glacier, is breathlessly going to break off and raise sea levels, and we're all going to, get floated away if you live near the ocean. The fact is it's being warmed by about 138 undersea active volcanoes that are warming the water. It's an ice shelf that's connected to the Antarctica, and it's being warmed from underneath, so it is getting a little brittle, highly unlikely to break off anytime soon. When glaciers expand, they grow out over the ocean, they break off, and those icebergs are really floating fertilizer centers. They have minerals in them trapped in the ice, and they help the phytoplankton grow. And the real lungs of the world, and this is covered in the book a little bit more, are the oceans, with phytoplankton producing 80% of the oxygen. So another thing that we've been lied about is, the rainforests of Brazil are the lungs of the world. They aren't. It's the oceans. Global burned area. It's declining. It's declining, and this is NASA data. We have less forest fires, not more. Long-term, what happened is websites now run by the Biden administration have gone in and cleared out, starting record keeping. I think 1983 is when they started. And if you look at that, they wanted to show increases in fires. The reality is we used to have a lot more fires, and it's really fire management that makes the difference. This picture shows how on the left, it's very dry, it's federally managed, it's ready to burn. On the right is private, and how it's greener and looking better, and it's more healthy. Wisconsin, North Carolina, Texas, Idaho, all have less fires than California, but they all have extensive forests. They manage their forests better. California has let it go wild, so they have a lot of fuel, and they have huge fires from time to time. Then they blame climate change rather than poor management. So it's a convenient excuse for the government falling down on the job. CO2 is recognized more than 100 years ago, in 1920, this is an article from Scientific American that's showing with higher CO2 amounts, spinach yields are up 150%. That's 1.5 times more. Potato yield almost triple, and barley yield up 100%. You get twice as much barley. So CO2 is recognized and has been for a long time that helps growth. The other interesting thing is scientists are finding that CO2 fueled plant growth in the darker areas around the deserts. Australia's desert, Africa is more desert, Western United States is deserty. It's fueling plant growth. CO2 is amazing plant growth. It's necessary. We're all exhaling it all the time. It's the circle of life. And plants grow better with more CO2, all the way up to 4 or 5 times more than we have. They also tolerate heat better, and they tolerate drought better. So they grow better with heat and less water with more CO2. What's not to like about that? NASA says that our Earth has greened about 40% in the last 50 years, and they attribute 70% of that to increased CO2. More CO2 is better, and for plants in the world and for everything that eats them. It also is increasing the moisture content because there's more water vapor in the air, more moisture content in the ground, even though the plants don't need it. And because they have less need for water, they don't take as much out of the earth. So CO2 is also helping to make the earth a bit, and a lot of the earth that isn't ocean, 71% ocean, is very dry. So this is also helping. This is the area of France that has regrown with forests. As we get more CO2, more forests grow. It really is amazing, and this is going on all over the world. So they're looking at about 20% more forests in France that have grown just in the last few decades. Crop production is up. The population of the world is up, up, up. Land use for cereal and other crops has stayed pretty stable, but we're producing a lot more food of all sorts. The yield, the amount per acre is up, up, up everywhere. CO2, as NASA pointed out, is probably 70% of that. But also we have nitrogen fertilizers, we have better management, agricultural practices, and better seeds. Plants grow, this is just to show you how plants grow bigger, better, faster with more CO2, and they have very deep roots to grab more minerals and grow better and supply us with more food. CO2 is amazing plant food. More CO2 has huge benefits in that we are getting a lot more crops they're growing a lot better, and we're getting bigger yields, more per acre. This means that farmers use the same amount of land to grow a lot more. That means they get bigger paychecks. We have more food to eat. And in fact, poverty is going down and food insecurity has gone down across the world because we are growing far more than we ever thought we could. And that was one of the other things the doomsters in the 60s and 70s said is we'd run out of food. In fact, we have more food than ever. In fact, we have so much food that we're putting 1/3 of the corn crop of the United States into our gas tanks. We actually are in a CO2 famine. We should have more CO2, not less. We should do triple or quadruple CO2. It's really important. Dr. Will Happer from Princeton says that 95% of the greenhouse effect is clouds and water vapor. Water vapor is about 20,000 parts per million. CO2 is just 420, and methane is less than 2. 95% from clouds and water vapor. This just shows nitrogen, oxygen, and water vapor, the 2% water vapor. These are 10,000 dots showing what's actually in the atmosphere. Also want to help you understand it, give you some anecdotes so you could talk to others, maybe if you can actually get people in the middle, because those that are indoctrinated and part of the climate religion will never believe you, don't want to talk about it. In fact, get very angry at you if you challenge their closely held beliefs with any facts that dispute their narrative. But adding CO2 is like adding 11 drops to an ounce of water that has 560 drops. And say it was alcohol and you had a few drinks, and then you blame all of the effect on those 11 drops out of the 560. That just is absurd. That's what they're talking about with the atmosphere. Or it's like adding 2 ounces to a gallon of water with 128 ounces, or a gallon of gasoline, and you had 2 ounces even of jet fuel. And it isn't, CO2 isn't that much warming than water vapor. And then claiming that all the distance you travel is because of that extra 2 ounces. It's simply false. This isn't the way the world works. Water vapor at 20,000 parts per million is 50 times more abundant than CO2 at 425. It's 11,000 times more abundant than methane at 1.8 part per million, and 60,000 times more abundant than nitrous oxide at 0.3 parts per million. It'll take 270 years for methane, aka natural gas, and nitrous oxide to double. And they'll still be itsy bitsy tiny parts of the atmosphere. There's no scientific reason to limit methane and nitrous oxide, and they're doing it to attack our food supply. So not only are they attacking our energy supply through climate policies, they are now attacking our food supply. And climate change does everything. It makes winters too warm for snow, and it makes them colder. And it makes us fatter, dumber, and depressed. It can do anything if you listen to the propaganda. In fact, just spin the wheel and the climate alarmist wheel, and you can get heavy snow, no snow, cold winter, warm winter, hurricanes, less hurricanes, you name it, it's equal opportunity. Climate change can do it all, folks. Why CO2? It's odorless. It's easy to confuse with carbon monoxide, which is a poison. They labeled it carbon, so we think of black charcoal and soot and smoke. And calling CO2 is like calling water hydrogen. CO2 is not carbon, it's CO2, and water is not hydrogen. By the way, we exhale about 2 pounds a day. Humans do of CO2. We emit about 3 billion tons of CO2 every year into the atmosphere just through our breath. Could it be and actually they've said it in various documents that they think there are too many humans, the 8 billion of us, and we are, many of us, I think most of us think it's going to be somebody else, but they want to get rid of billions of people, these globalists who are using climate change. They think there's too many people in the world. I disagree. We are growing more crops than ever. We haven't even tapped the ocean. We can support more people with wise policies, and we should. The United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and the Club of Rome all say they want to use worldwide. They did this decades ago. They've been at it for about 50 years. They started this even during the global cooling scare of the 70s. They want to use climate change as a problem to control and direct mankind. They want to have us frightened so they can make policies that we would never accept if we weren't frightened. And a worldwide problem needs a worldwide solution. It needs the UN, they say, the UN to control nations and tell us what to do, kind of like they're doing in Europe, where the Netherlands is downsizing farming there. They're the second largest exporter in the world because the EU told them to for climate goals. So their leaders shrug and say, oh, we must do it because we have to meet our climate goals from the EU on high. That's what the UN wants to do to all of us. They first used the global warming, now the climate change to drive policies. To achieve net zero, that zero CO2 released by man's activities, they will have to control everything that we do. Because eating, watching Netflix, using the computer, consuming or doing anything, driving, flying, all having clothes on, all takes and releases CO2. Energy, in order for us to enjoy good lives, you can see the difference. Without fossil fuels, people live in huts. Truly, with fossil fuels, we can live in skyscrapers if we want to. I don't want to. I like cows. But we have all those things because we have abundant, reliable, affordable energy. It's necessary for civilization. For 200 years ago, we still have 2 billion people who are using dung and wood for energy. They want energy. They want electricity. Coal, we use 8.5 billion tons of coal annually. It's about 41 billion barrels of energy compared to oil. China gets 56% of all their energy from coal. We make coal, oil, and natural gas into everything we use. Firefighting foams, medicines, vitamins, paints, cleaners, graphite, cement, steel, everything we need comes from fossil fuels. India gets 75% of all their energy from coal. China gets 56%. They're building hundreds of coal plants right now while we're trying to close ours down. Biden and Harris are trying to regulate them out of existence. Those coal plants will last 50 to 75 years. Fossil fuels have grown the most. China emits more pollution and more CO2 than all industrial nations combined. John Kerry, the climate czar, has said that it doesn't matter what the United States does. Even if we got to net zero, it wouldn't make any difference at all. That's the truth. So why are we wasting trillions of dollars and driving up your electric rates for nothing? Without energy, we don't have the energy for um, which is food for machines that serve us. We have good lives because we have machines that serve us. Air conditioning and heat come to mind most, and also hot, cold running water. We're using a gargantuan amount of energy, and 83% of it comes from coal, oil, and natural gas. Look at this. We're still using a lot of wood and dung. And wind and solar only provide 2% of the world's energy at all. They're still a tiny portion. It's just plain fantasy and goofy to think we can change that in the next decade or two or three. 98% of our transportation comes from oil. The United States uses 20 million barrels a day of the 101 million barrels used every day. That's 37 billion barrels a day. Natural gas, we use 135 trillion cubic feet. It's amazing. And we have hundreds and hundreds of years of natural gas, oil, and coal at present extraction levels. More CO2 emissions means more GDP per capita, means people are wealthier, means world population, means world life expectancy, and more CO2 emissions all track together. Things that are made from fossil fuels, virtually everything that we touch as modern people are made from that. Climate policies, we're using our money, borrowing money to add to our national debt, $35 trillion national debt, to subsidize wind, solar, and transmission wires and batteries. Then we purchase them from communist China because they make 80% of them. They get stronger, they strengthen their economy, they grow their military. We get weaker because our energy costs a lot more, and we have less economic activity here without a pro-energy policy of the United States. By adding part-time wind and solar that are subsidized, we drive up our electric rates because we have to keep our full-time power too, and we have to pay for the part-time power too. Those cost a lot, and we have to pay for thousands upon thousands of miles of very expensive transmission wires. If we stop subsidizing wind and solar, we wouldn't have any more of them because they're really more expensive. Also, Germany, Denmark, and the UK all have a lot more wind and solar. They're adding a lot more, and they pay triple our electric rates, and they are going even higher. The Biden-Harris regime wants to end coal plants in America, and they want to make it very expensive, very, very expensive, using untried, untested, at-scale carbon capture that we really don't know if it's going to work or not. So they want to make natural gas very expensive, and that's our most reliable source of energy. But we need coal too. We should keep that, just as the Chinese and Indians are ramping up. Energy shortages cause food shortages, and they cause high prices for everything. Climate policies are inflation policies because everything we do consume, including breathing, releases CO2 and requires energy. Sri Lanka followed the UN's advice, and they ended fossil fuel fertilizers, and it tanked their economy. South Africa has let their coal electricity just fall apart because they were going to get wind and solar. But you can't run a full-time grid on part-time wind and solar. They aren't building enough of it. Now they have blackouts 12 hours a day, 12 hours a day, and they don't have a very functioning economy. This is the sort of stuff the UN and the World Economic Forum are talking about for you and me. This just shows that when this is during the Texas big storm, February 2021, wind and solar at the bottom, the blue and yellow drop down to almost nothing. This black squiggly line is the natural gas that just grew everything, that just ramped way up before finally it failed too. We have to pay double because we're paying for both wind and solar. We're subsidizing wind and solar. They need lots of transmission wires. We're being propagandized for the benefit of politicians, the media, the green industrial complex, and communist China. Scotland cut down 16 million trees to put up wind towers. The facts just don't support the climate alarmists. Pure climate policy is not climate change. Very quickly. The Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada have all proposed downsizing nitrogen fertilizers by 30 to 50% for the climate. It's unnecessary. There's no reason to do it. Water vapor is 60,000 times more abundant than nitrous oxide, but yet they're regulating nitrous oxide. Ireland has passed the laws and are paying farmers to kill 200,000 milk cows. Dairy is going up in Ireland. Denmark has passed a climate tax on cows and pigs. It won't take effect until 2060. They don't like the methane. No reason climate-wise to regulate methane at all, but yet they're doing it. Price of food's going up. People are waking up to the high costs that we have of this clean energy transition. We've been lied to about it. It's more expensive, not less expensive. Why are they doing this? High food and energy costs will cause unrest, and it's a reason to control us, to manage us, to put in rations like we had during World War II. Some of the climate crazed are actually advocating that. They want to ration us. They want to have degrowth and depopulation, which in the real world are called depression and recession. No one wants those. An ever shrinking economy means less for everyone, and it gets worse for everyone. That's bad. They want to control us by rationing CO2. Do you know how much your CO2 plane flight emits? You can look at it. They are testing carbon tracking cars now. They want to give us a monthly CO2 limit. And if you can buy and afford carbon credits, you can. If you can't, you'll bump up against your limit. When you do, you will be limited to buying the things they want. They've also proposed around the world 15-minute cities. They want to lock you in a 15-minute city, take away your car, and fine you if you drive your car outside of the area more than 100 times a year. That's only round trip 50 days, folks. C40 cities, they're out there, they're hiding this information now because they were outed, and then they claimed it was aspirations, not goals. Mayors sign people up for this. Many U.S. cities are in the C40 cities. They want to limit their citizens to a vegan or near as possible to that. 3 new clothes outfits a year. Men probably like that, women not so much. 1 airplane flight every 4 years, and a 95% reduction in private car ownership. They want to reduce all cars. And what they're going to do when you exceed your monthly CO2 limit, they'll let you buy things they think are reasonable, such as bugs instead of meat. And they're going to adjust our behavior over time. Both Europe and the United States have approved adding bugs to our food supply and are going about doing that. There is no climate emergency. Ending fossil fuel use, coal, oil, and natural gas is unnecessary, expensive, and dangerous to the West in many different ways. Read more about it in my book, Climate and Energy Lies. And there you go. And this will be available online. Tom's going to post it once I give him a PDF file of this.
Absolutely fantastic. You packed so much great stuff into a short period of time. So huge thumbs up. People have been asking me which podcast of mine they should start with. And I think this is a good one. It's going to be a good one to start with because, yeah, so much of my favorite stuff was in there. So how long did it take to write the book? It must have taken forever, didn't it?
Oh, it did. It took for years. I was working on it for years and years and putting things together and then finally, just condensing it into a book. And I had a lot more material than that and trying to make it understandable for people and give them an understanding of the more in-depth understanding of this. Why are they lying? What are the lies for? And what is the purpose? And what can you do about it? And I want to give them the facts because as more people get exposed to the facts, they start to not tolerate the nonsense and the lies. And they start to see through it.
So have you been giving talks like this in real life for a long time and getting feedback from audiences?
Yes, I have. I love to do audiences, love to talk in front of them. Given this presentation or a much shorter version, usually in person, they don't want to take this much time. But yes, I have. I get good response. Many people are, gee, I didn't know that. And I understand it because we are propagandized on a regular basis. Children are indoctrinated, and some of the worst actually are the kind of indoctrinated youth, the 30 and under crowd, and it's changing maybe some of it. But many of them are so indoctrinated that you can show them data from NOAA or NASA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they'll say, oh, that's just made up stuff. So you can show them facts that don't agree with their indoctrination, and they just pretty much, no, I don't want to see it. You're making that all up because it doesn't agree with my worldview. It's really disturbing because facts don't care about your feelings, and eventually the facts assert themselves. And if we continue down this path of horrendous energy policy, We're going to be in deep problems. China is on the rise. China is totalitarian. China is a bully. China, citizens lack freedom. And there's a whole movement here to take away our freedoms for the climate. If they can get away with it, they will.
So you mentioned that you have been censored online. Or I was wondering, in real life, have they stopped you from speaking, or have you had protesters at your events?
I've not had any protesters yet, but look forward to it. And the events have been smaller. I think if they were well publicized at a university, we'd see a lot more of that, or they'd cancel us. It's hard to even get in universities or other places with this message because it doesn't fit the narrative. They don't want to allow anyone who doesn't tell them the standard narrative to speak. Also, they don't want to do debates because they are so weak on all of these facts that I presented. And they just start with, well, it's assumed that CO2 is warming everything and we've got to stop it. So we have to do all these things. And then they talk about all those things. It isn't. It's a waste of money, time, energy, and it's very harmful to our economy. So yeah, I'd love to speak to more audiences of all different sorts, whether online or in person. And we need to get the message out. And I understand that I'm of the very much of a minority view, but the facts speak for themselves.
So when you do get to the Q&A portion of your talk, so what are the most common questions that you hear?
You know, people are curious about the whys a lot. Why would they be doing this? Why would they lie? Why would NOAA and NASA lie to us? Because I'm accusing them of lying, because they are. And they're doing it for money, because their politician masters control how much money they get. And they get more money by giving their masters what they want. And I've seen it over and over again. My involvement in politics is those who pay for reports generally get what they want from those reports. There's very little honest science anymore. And that's been proven out over and over again, that even in the medical world, half of them are peer-reviewed papers are just fake. The same thing with climate. And it's also, they censor them, like Professor Dick Limson, highly qualified from MIT, knows this stuff inside and out. He's a physicist, studies the climate, and they've censored his papers. The people, those editors that allowed those, his studies questioning the validity of the whole CO2 argument causing warming, where the editors lost their jobs for allowing that to get out in the print, and then they were censored. They were taken down. So it's happened, and LinkedIn has censored me and others. Facebook throttles us back. They censor all kinds of different information they don't like, or they put, partially false on it, and then they make some things up. They are doing it. X is the only place out there, Twitter, formerly Twitter, that you can get straightforward information and allow people to correct it. If I or others are wrong, then they should provide some correction. And I've seen on X a lot of the climate realism deniers, because they don't want the facts, just kind of go away because they make statements and you challenge them and say, hey, this statement, back it up, please. I can back mine up, and they can't.
So when climate realists like us meet people in the real world and we have time to just say something quick, at what point or two do you think it's best to lead with when we talk to them?
I think that it has been warmer in the past. It was warmer in the 1930s during the Dust Bowl. It was warmer when Vikings settled Greenland. It was warmer when the Romans built the fort that's under 2,000 years of ice. So that number one, it's been warmer. There's no relationship between heat and CO2, the temperature. And the CO2 is necessary plant food. We all exhale it. Without it, we die and all plants die. And the more of it, the better. They add it to greenhouses, and worldwide crop harvests and yields are up. And we should continue seeing this. We have the greening around the deserts. So I think those are two important points. Is it has been warmer in the past, and it wasn't caused by SUVs and CO2. And CO2 is wonderful plant food, and we're feeding more people than ever. There are many good things. And fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, provide 80% of the world's energy. It's not changing anytime soon. And we need it for heating and air conditioning and cooking our foods. And I think those are the main things that I would emphasize with people.
Okay. Any other points you want to make before we finish up here?
Well, now that I'm thinking about it, what you just talked about, and it's covered in the book, and I didn't put it in any of the slides, so you'll have to read the book to get it. And it's just a very short, explanation of the island of Hispaniola. On one side is Tahiti, and on the other side is the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic, 43% of it is still forested. They have lots of economic activity. They have resorts that people work at. They are prosperous. They also have an enlightened policy where they subsidize propane for poorer people to cook with and heat their homes with, so they aren't cutting down the forests. So they have economic activity because they're importing oil and natural gas for fuel and electricity. They're subsidizing propane so people don't cut down forests. And they're building a wall to keep the other half of the island out, the Haitians, because the Haitians have cut down nearly every tree on their side of the island. And now they're eyeing up the other half of the island because they've had an unenlightened anti-fossil fuel government. And now they have no government because it's collapsed. Because without reliable energy, affordable energy, and electricity, the ability to get ahead in life for common people is almost not there whatsoever. So that's covered briefly and with pictures in the book, just to give people an idea of what we should be doing, contrasted with what is happening that we shouldn't be doing.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a huge fan of your book. I read it on Kindle, and it is packed with great stuff. I think you have a great ability to communicate to the normies, to normal people. Clearly communicate. It's very important. And I will put the PDF that you just of the slides. I'll put that on my Substack so people can see that. And thanks a lot for doing this. I appreciate your work.
Hey, you're very welcome. And yes, the whole goal was to make the complicated stuff of climate and energy understandable for regular people. And that's the goal of the book. So I hope you'll read it. And if you do, leave a review, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts on it. And you can also go to our website, truthandenergyandclimate.com, truthandenergyandclimate.com. And you can sign up for a weekly energy and climate newsletter that we do by email. We don't sell our lists. So have a fantastic day. These are really important issues, folks, and we need to change our directions fast.
All right. Thank you very much, Frank Lasee. Talk to you next time.